Welcome to Module 1. In this module, we're going to be talking about the basics and some of the functionality and features of Windows Server 2019. With some of those features, we're going to be looking at the difference between on-premise or on-prem, as it's normally referred to as, in comparison to a cloud environment. We're going to look at the functionality and requirements for Windows virtual machines, as well as containerization. We're going to be looking at the difference between the different versions or editions of Server 2019 and what each of the features are available within those editions, as well as the installation process. So with that, we're going to be looking at how to install the operating system. We're going to be talking about using that installation with a virtual machine, as well as some of the configurations that we'll do after the initial install. So briefly wanted to touch on the difference between a PC or a client computer versus a server computer. You can think of it in terms of a PC or personal computer, client computer, or even a workstation. Those terms all kind of can be clumped together. And basically what they identify is a single system, most cases a laptop or a desktop. You could even kind of put in smartphones and tablets in there now, because they are essentially a very small computer that you can access many of the same resources with. But what a PC is a computer that's going to allow access to other resources, some of those being stored locally on that system, or over the internet or a local network connection to access shared resources, which would be offered from a server computer. So you can think of a server as really any computer that shares a resource for others to access. And that can be, like I said, a on-prem server. It could be a cloud server. And between those different types of environments, how the physical server is could be a number of different types of hardware as well. Fairly common type of server hardware is in the form of a rack mount server. With those, you may see blade servers and other things like that. When we're talking about a rack-mounted piece of equipment, be it a server, a storage unit, or power supply, switch, router, all of those things in the majority of situations in organizations are in the form of a rack mount. So what that looks like is, if we go over here and look at this, you can see each of these devices are in a rack mount. They have screws on either side of them to physically attach them to the rack. There's a number of different ways that you might see these. Some of them screw directly into the rack. Some of them are placed on shelves. Some of them have nice little toolless, removable options where you can slide the whole device out, push a couple pins in, and remove it from the rack. So there's a number of different hardware types that you might see in that. And with this illustration, you can see that they have some of the smaller devices up at the top. Each of those are representing a one rack unit. And what those are referred to is a lot of times you'll say or hear a server that's a 1 RU, so rack unit, or maybe 1 unit. So there's different terminology sometimes, but basically what that is indicating is it is the thickness of the device, being that it takes up 1 rack unit. So you can see the first 3 there are a web server, file server, and firewall server. Each of those are representing 1 R unit per device. And then you can see the next couple devices are 2 R units thick, and so on. You know, the larger the device, the more R units it is. And then towards the bottom, you have a management station. Those are typically like a laptop type device that connects to a KVM, which allows you to switch between each of those rack-mounted devices and interact with them all within that one device. So you don't have to have a mouse, a keyboard, and a monitor for every single one. That's the functionality with a KVM. And I believe on the last slide, I did not mention a UPS, but that is a uninterrupted power supply, which is also on this illustration. And what those are for is basically just like the name implies, if the power were to go out, a UPS has either a number of batteries, or, you know, depending on the size and capability, some of them have a large number of batteries and can basically take on the responsibility for the power needs if the power was to fluctuate or go out completely. UPSs generally are for short-term power interruptions. Most organizations, if you are required to have a ongoing power source, even if the power was to go out for a long period of time, most of those organizations would have a UPS that would provide power for a number of minutes, you know, at least long enough for a more long-term solution like a diesel generator, things like that, to kick in and take on that responsibility in a more long-term fashion. And that moves us to virtualization. We will be using virtual machines within this course. So it is important to understand some of the basic requirements and functionality of virtualization. With virtualization, it is essentially virtualizing the hardware that you're going to be using to run an operating system. And what that means is you can have, we'll say a laptop for an example. You might have Windows 10 or Windows 11 running on that laptop. And that is the operating system running on the hardware of your laptop. And with the virtualization that we'll be using in this course, it is type 2, which runs on top of the workstation operating system. So the way that that looks is you would log into your system, open up and get into your operating system, and then install an application over top of or within that application, such as VirtualBox, and that would allow you to install an additional operating system and run it on top of your current operating system that you're running. The other type of virtualization or hypervisor interaction that we're looking at here is a type 1, where the hypervisor itself is running off of the hardware without a full-blown operating system like Windows, allowing you to install virtual machines and run those directly off of the hardware. So those are kind of the two different types of virtualization. Generally, when you're working on testing and things like that, like we'll be doing in this course, you'll be using type 2, whereas in an enterprise environment, you may be using something more like type 1, where it's running directly off of the hardware and is more efficient to run a number of different virtual machines. And with virtualization, there are some hardware requirements that you should be in consideration of. Most modern computers will allow virtualization. You may have to go into the BIOS of a device to either allow or configure some of the hardware requirements for running a virtual machine. Some of the hypervisor requirements, hypervisor acceleration, second level address translation. These are some of the functionality within the hardware to allow a virtual machine to be installed and run. Virtual machines will have a configuration file. The type of virtualization that you use is going to be dependent on where that file is stored. And then there is also a virtual hard disk file that's created when you install a virtual machine. We'll get into what some of those settings are when we start installing a virtual machine. But the two different types are a thick provisioning, which is basically you select a fixed space for your hard drive, meaning that if you want to provision 50 gigabytes for a virtual machine, that 50 gigabytes is a fixed space, and you determine that right up front when you create the virtual machine. And then there's the option of a thin provisioned, which you basically, maybe you say that your machine needs 50 gigs, but it only uses that space as needed. So if you say that you need 50 gigs and you start the installation and maybe it only uses 5 of those 50 gigs, as that virtual machine grows with installing applications and things like that, that is how the dynamic allocation works for that. With that, there are, like I said, different options of on-prem versus cloud. There's benefits and downfalls to both options. So you have to, in an organization, kind of determine what works best for you. In this class, we're going to be using all on-prem, meaning that the virtual machine is going to be local to each of you on your own system, or within a lab machine. So some of the options that you have out there with cloud computing are, Azure, which is the Microsoft cloud computing environment. There's AWS for Amazon and things like that. So with that, we're going to look at some of the different options that we can configure. And one of those options is nested virtualization. Basically, you can have a number of virtual machines, and it can be as complex as you want it to be. There are some a number of different options that you can use with that, such as testing in different environments. So you could potentially have a number of different Windows 10 virtual machines that you could be testing with different configurations and different applications, things like that. Here's a look at what nested virtualization using Hyper-V might look like. You can see that you have the hardware. The hypervisor is directly looking or directly communicating and using the hardware resources. And then you have a management system and two virtual machines. And then you have another virtual machine that also has nested virtual machines within that one. So you can see how the nested structure starts to look like. And that moves us over to containerization. There's some different types of containers. Docker is probably the most common. Microsoft also has an option for containers. Essentially what a container is, you can see kind of how it interacts with the operating system here. You have the operating system that runs a container software that runs within the host operating system. And then within that containerization software, you have each of these different containers that within a single container has an application running on it. So, you know, a number of years back, you might have a virtual machine that runs maybe a single application or a couple applications directly on that operating system. With containers, you can isolate those more from each other. You can run specific configurations and configure each of the applications within a single container. So it's a more efficient way of isolating the applications and makes for a much smoother way of deployment for applications and managing those applications. And you know, a term commonly used for isolating applications is sandboxing. That is, you can think of it as placing an application in a box, and it's not allowed to get out of that box. Essentially, that is what sandboxing does. And containers allow you to do that to where an application wouldn't have access to the underlying operating system. Like I mentioned, Docker is the most common container software, and Windows Server has a function to utilize that. And then there's also the option to further restrict the containers, and we'll look at that on the next slide. But using that off of the kernel operating system is one option. So you can see here some of the options of the top there. It's the kernel of Windows Server running, then the Docker followed by each of the Windows containers. Whereas you can further segment that and basically run that off of the hypervisor, where they would have an additional layer of separation of that. So that kind of gives us a brief look at containers and how they can be configured to restrict access from other applications and the operating system itself. Now we're going to look at a number of the features that are available with Windows Server 2019. And the first feature is Active Directory, which is one that we will focus on quite a bit in this course. What Active Directory does is it provides a central location for managing user accounts and computer objects, provisioning a number of permissions with those. We can look at things like group policy, where you can base access or permissions off of groups. You can do a lot of computer configuration and things like that from a central location, which makes the job of an administrator much easier. And the cloud version of Active Directory, which is Azure, has all of these features and a number of other features that are cloud-based. And there are also some options of a hybrid join where you can have devices joined to your on-prem Active Directory as well as Azure up in the cloud. Some of the security features with Server 2019: Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which provides a more in-depth look at files and processes that are running. You have some additional protection with the shielded virtual machines, which protects the hypervisor. There is additional emphasis on IIS, which is Internet Information Services. And what IIS does is allow you to publish a website from the server operating system. So that is Microsoft's option for hosting a website. It's one of a number of very popular tools for hosting websites. There are some additional security features with files and folders, security policies and things like that. Some options for encryption, such as encrypting file system, which is can be used with NTFS formatted hard drives. NTFS is the new technology file system, which is the required format for Windows operating systems. Some of the other features that you can use with NTFS: user quotas, so you can limit how much hard drive space users have and can use. There are some data duplication options, some journaling, self-healing, things like that. There are some improved performance with the storage and replication, things like that. Some additional performance and reliability features: you have a privileged mode. You can protect processes, multitasking and multi-threading, processor scalability, and server clustering to cluster systems together, as you can see in this illustration here. In this, you have 3 Windows 2019 servers that are clustered to logically look as one server. So a number of times you may go to a resource over the internet, and you connect to the same name over and over, or the same website, but you may or may not be connecting to the same physical device each time. There are a number of reasons why you might connect to a different one. They could have load balancing implemented to where if server A starts seeing a lot of web requests and web B is not getting that many, the load balancer may push over more of that web traffic to server B to balance it out. So no one resource gets overwhelmed. Some other options, you can have a failover configuration where maybe server A does take all of the requests, but if it were to get overwhelmed, if it were to lose power or have anything that would interrupt its service, a failover would occur, and then all traffic would go to the B server. So those are some of the common configurations for how you might cluster and what reasoning behind it you have. Looking at some of the administrative tools, Server Manager is one of the most used tools within this course because it gives you access to a number of configuration and monitoring tools all in one. And we'll take a look at that here shortly. Another one is Windows PowerShell, which is a much more interactive and feature-rich command line tool compared to the old command line interface. We will also look at the Windows Admin Center, which is a newer tool that is a web-based tool, which basically provides a lot of that management functionality. On this screenshot is Windows Server Manager. You probably are unable to read a lot of that text, but it has on this screen, the local server is selected. Some of the information you have on there is the server name, if it is part of a work group or a domain, and then a number of configuration items for that local server. A lot of what we'll look at in this course will be accessed through Server Manager. This is an illustration of Admin Center, which is the web-based tool that provides a lot of that management functionality as well. Some of the installation options that we have with Server OS, you have some options to install the full server environment that gives you a desktop to interact with, which is the larger install. It has all of the graphical user interface features. That is the option that we will be looking at in this course, just so you have all of the options available and you can interact with those like you would on a number of servers out in an organization that you may work at. The other option is the server core and the nano server option, which have a smaller footprint, which basically installs a smaller version of the operating system. Server core, for example, does not have the desktop environment, so it boots right into a command prompt, and for that reason, you don't have that desktop environment running. You have a lot less resources that are being used on the system. So it does use less storage, memory, and processor, much more efficient in those terms, and does provide a little less of a attack vector for that. So, and then we're going to look at some of the cloud features. And some of those cloud features with a hybrid cloud, like I had mentioned before, where you can use some of the functionality between on-prem and Azure. Some of those functions are network adapter features. You have additional features for backing up to Azure Cloud. Some of the management features, site recovery. So if you needed to recover a site after some type of disaster, Kubernetes software, which is in coordination with the containerization stuff we were looking at. And then one other feature is the Windows subsystem for Linux, which makes use of running Linux within the Windows operating system. That allows you to use a lot of the functionality that you get within a Linux distribution directly on your Windows server, which it is also available on Windows 10 and 11 on the client side as well. That moves us into the different editions of Server 2019. With that, you have a number of features that change with each of these editions. So you have Essentials, which is just as the name implies, the essentials that you need for the server. Standard Edition, which is kind of that mid-tier, and then Data Center, which provides you all of the functionality. With each of these editions, you're basically licensing more features. With that, each of the editions obviously are going to cost more per edition as you go from this list left to right. In this course, we use an evaluation installation, which allows you to evaluate the operating system for free. It doesn't matter which of these options you select in terms of they're all free. If you were to go out and purchase these, or if you were commissioned to go out and determine what operating system edition you need to install, it would be important to know that there are a number of different features and things like that that are available. So with that, in this class, I always recommend just installing the Data Center Edition and make sure that you install the desktop Data Center Edition. That will give you all of the functionality that's available, and the desktop version will give you the desktop to interact, so you're not only allowed to use the command line. But there are a number of features that are available between these different editions. In addition to those, there is a Windows Storage Server 2019 that can be offered by original equipment manufacturers. So in other words, if you were to buy hardware, the vendor could potentially put this on that hardware and sell it to you. However, you cannot purchase this directly from Microsoft and install it. Some of the other pieces to look at are hypervisor functionality and free to download and use. And kind of with that, that will kind of close us out on this video, and I will pick up the rest on a second video to finish out the rest of the module 1. Thank you for watching.